Hey guys, so I want to talk a little bit about the tank meta in Heroes of the Storm right now. Tanks are kind of in an odd spot. Arguably, a lot of people say this has been the most stale tank meta because there are really only four tanks that we see consistently. We see Joanna, we see ETC, we see Garrosh, and we see Mal'Ganis. Outside of that, it's rather low that we'll see any other tank. Low chance anyways that we'll see any other tank. I've been playing a lot of Diablo and Muradin on a variety of accounts, and they still seem rather strong, but they lack the consistency of those four tanks. Those four tanks tend to have more guaranteed engages, and you're going to notice a few times on Muradin where I'm throwing my stun and the enemies are just standing right behind a minion wave, so there's really no way to even stack my stuns reasonably because they'll just walk behind a minion, and then like no matter where I try to walk, they walk around to the other side of the minion, and there's no way that I land my stun. And it makes it kind of infuriating because Muradin's actually a really cool tank with a really cool gimmick. In fact, I would like to see his stun work a little bit more like Alarak's Q, where it just goes through and it hits everything in that area. You, instead of throwing a Storm Bolt, you drop it down. Or maybe nerf it a little bit, ditch the quest, and make it point and click, so you just always stun the one person that you're trying to stun. Because that's the main issue about Muradin. He has no guaranteed CC. Otherwise, he's a powerhouse. I mean, I play Muradin a lot. When I play Muradin, I can pretty much just jump on people and out-heal a lot of the damage they deal, stun a lot, do even more damage. He just kind of does. He's such a beast when he jumps into these fights, and he just out-heals everything. But did you see, I had to literally slow him with a W, reposition outside of the wave just to land a stack, which means that I always have to take unnecessary damage to get stacks, and it just becomes difficult. And against tanks that have unstoppables, it's very obvious when he's going to throw a Stormbolt too, which means if you're against a Garrosh or a Joanna, they can always land a stun when you're trying to go in. There was a recent Reddit thread, and I'd like to actually talk about it. Apologize for all the different. Let me find it. Where is it? Here we go. Lauber did a thread. Let me zoom in a little bit. So Lauber says, "Hey everyone, Lauber here, and I've been a tank main ever since I started playing HOTS about 5 to 6 years ago. I'm going to keep playing at least a little bit longer. I've always liked tanking, especially in the competitive. Now, Lauber was one of the best tanks in the pro scene that I've ever seen. He filled in for a lot of pro teams, then he joined in after HEC dropped, and he absolutely destroyed any team that he was going against. And he was one of the most aggressive and consistent tanks I've ever seen. He's mostly known for his Diablo. He'd go Q build Diablo, jump on people, and absolutely drop them. I'm gonna pause this while we're waiting, or while I'm reading this, because it is kind of relevant. Now, he says, anyways, I didn't really come here to talk about why or how I play tanks, more so on how stale it is for a long time the tank main is right now. Now, remember, he's European, so it may be a little off. And I'm not talking about the heroes not being viable or that three heroes have been dominating the meta for a very long time. I want to talk about the patches for tank, or the lack of. So then he talks about how there hasn't been a major tank patch in quite a long time. And then there's a defense from Adam. Now, Adam says, I appreciate this feedback, but there's actually been 48 changes of warriors in the last 5 months. And he's just counting that as 5 months because that's from the beginning of the year. And he's like, and I've been reading a lot about the tank meta, and he also plays this competitive level. He says for actual performance, almost all the warriors are between 49 and 52% win rate, including that of Blazing Stitches are the lowest, but including that of all of those main tanks that we've already talked about. He's not trying to say he's not looking at this, but he says it's a tricky subject. I actually like his response for a little bit later in this post, though. And I need to find out where it is, because he actually comments later in this post that I think is much more of an interesting comment to talk about. And I might need to find a way to clear up some of these, because it was, I mean, here's Leon Black commenting as well, and he says, it's a bit disingenuous to say the tank meta hasn't been basically the same all of 2020. It's been 4 tanks plus 1 support, one of those tanks being powerful due to a really bad bug, which is Mal'Ganis. And then you also have Uther, who just kind of snuck in. They keep nerfing Uther, and when they nerfed Uther, they're done. Leon Black's talked about this for a while. I think There needs to be a guaranteed way to land Q, and maybe you take a talent that is on a contested tier or something, but there needs to be a way to guarantee this. Stitches, give him wave clear, and that's been my issue with Stitches too. When he had his old W build, you had wave clear. 2 Ws would wipe a wave, and that's all you ever needed to do, and you could go from wave to wave to wave. Then they nerfed his W, and they put most of the damage onto heroes and being closer with it. Diablo, this should be reverted back to being more powerful, and I completely agree. I don't think you need that percent health damage, but when it switched over to armor, it became kind of just terrible. And then Tyrael, mana, wave clear. He's got better wave clear than, yeah, exactly. He's like, Tyrael's been seen to be a little bit better. Lower cooldown of Locust Swarm, I completely agree. Now, that is what Leon's talked about, but there was one particular response that I wanted to bring up, and I remembered it was a little later, and I just wish I could find it because it was rather interesting. Here we go. He says, here's a circular thought exercise. Murden, Garrosh, Diablo, and Mal'Ganis have had their periods in the history where they were immediate first pick and first ban material, and were absolutely considered generalist tanks. Even go back further enough, you'll see Arthas and Stitches were the original of these consistent and generalist tanks. And now what keeps happening is with balance, it keeps adjusting. And so what he's saying is that even if we buff or nerf something, once people get excited about something in particular, they're going to stick with it. W build Diablo has only ever been buffed since it was popular. And it's still strong. It's still very, very strong. So let's talk about it for a little bit and see, is it a balance issue or is it a sociology issue? What I mean by that is ETC and Joanna I've always thought have been very strong. And I was actually surprised that while I was moving up in rank on my Smurfs, I was playing a lot of ETC and I was playing a lot of Joanna, and other people weren't playing them. In fact, I got them almost every single game, and the enemy team was always picking like Mal'Ganis, and they were picking Murden, and they were picking a wide variety of tanks. But then all the streamers start going more ETC and Joanna, ETC and Joanna, ETC and Joanna, and guess what? Now you're only seeing ETC and Joanna. The balance changes of these haven't really been adjusted that much. ETC didn't receive any buffs, Joanna didn't receive any buffs, and in fact Diablo got buffed since he's been played a lot. So is it really a meta thing? Now the biggest change that's happened, and that might have shifted it more in this style, is the turret changes. The more aggressive you play on a tank, the more risky you are. And people like Diablo don't have an easy escape. So if they charge in and go for a kill really quick, they don't have a way out. Diablo is done. Once he goes in, he's done. Which means the 4 tanks that are left are all very conservative tanks. They're not dive tanks that want to go in and get like one quick kill. They're tanks that are just generally doing their best to stay in the fight for as long as possible and punish like 1 or 2 mistakes that happen in that game. And that means that we're currently in a meta where the safer tanks are working. Now, if they revert these tower changes or nerf these tower changes, does that mean that it's going to bring back these tanks? I'm not really sure. They have nerfed the tower changes a little bit, and everyone's still playing the same tanks. Ultimately, I still feel like a lot of these other tanks are very powerful. Murden still feels like you pretty much just stomp Joanna. And it's not necessarily that like you're winning at anything, it's just the fact that you're doing a lot of damage. And she has to burn her trait early, which means that you can save your Q until after her trait's over, and you can stun her from there. Or you can simply just stun the divers that are on that team and completely ignore Joanna. You have much more impact in the game playing Murden, in team fights anyways, than Joanna has in team fights. The only major difference is that Joanna has a much better engage, and Joanna has wave clear, which makes her more consistent for the entire course of the battle, despite the fact that Murden does way more damage and way more self-sustain. So, I wonder if they did give wave clear to Murden, would he come back? Like, is that the answer? Is that the fact that, like, right now we're in a Storm League meta, and we're seeing the heroes that are good in Storm League, and those are the tanks that have wave clear. Those are the tanks that have, like, that can last long times in a lot of these fights. Is that all it really takes, is having tanks like that? I'm not really sure. I personally am wondering if it's better to nerf all the tanks or buff all the tanks, right? If you nerf all the tanks, I think people are just going to start playing bruisers instead of tanks. Imperius is already closing in on being run as a main tank instead, and there's also a couple other bruisers like Zool that you can just play as a main tank. So if they just nerf ETC and Joanna without buffing any of the other tanks, I have a feeling that we're going to start seeing a lot more weird tanks, and tanks are going to get less impactful. They already have almost zero macro potential in the games outside of Joanna's wave clear. Which means that if you nerf their capabilities in team fights, then suddenly you almost don't even need tanks. We saw this happen a lot at the end of the support apocalypse, right? Where they nerfed all of the supports in the game because double support was getting popular. When they nerfed all the supports in the game, what they ended up finding, or at least what I found anyways, and the pros found anyways, is that you didn't even need healers anymore. People started running comps with more self-sustain and started just running like Abathur or ETC as main healer. We saw this happen multiple times in the pro scene, where right after they nerfed all of the supports, we saw people just stop running supports in general. And that's another big issue that can be created, is if we nerf the tanks too much, we're going to lose the potential and the power of these tanks. But at the same time, if you buff a tank too much, when Mal'Ganis was buffed, he was absolutely unkillable and impossible to deal with. Which means that if we buff tanks too much, they're going to be unkillable, because ultimately we don't have as many answers in this game for very tanky tanks, right? In League of Legends, you can get a whole bunch of things that do percent health damage, but in this game, there's only a couple auto attackers now that have the percent health damage is actually better than their other talents on that tier. So is it worth, like Greymane, for example, you don't want to go into wolf form very early, and doing that percent health damage is necessary to get people low. So you have to take Executioner, even if the enemies are running like double or triple tank, purely because you're going to get CC'd to death if you're stuck in Worgen form. So I don't know the best answer to this. What I think would be the best answer is to buff all the tanks that aren't currently meta, and give them answers to some of the problems that they have. And then what we should be doing next is we should be giving more options to deal with these super tanky tanks. These tanks that can just sit in the team fight and never have to worry about dying. If these tanks can literally run rampant and fight 1v3 or 1v4 in the backline like Mal'Ganis can do, and in this case Muradin can do, I think it would be best to not even have to... I think it would be best to give some more answers to it, is what I'm saying. Is the only answer shouldn't be Malthael, because then you could run more and more tanks. So if they buff tanks too much, we're going to be in a double tank meta because we don't have answers to tanks. If we nerf tanks too much, we're going to just run bruisers and heavy burst comps and heavy engage comps. We're going to be running more like jump in, void prison, lock everyone down, and instantly kill everyone because the tanks can zone for their team. You'll have situations where if you buff tanks, you're going to have situations where Twin Blades loses in a 1v1 to Muradin. And that's where our problem is. And this is the same issue that I found in the healer meta. When they buffed up a bunch of healers, people started running double support, double healer, and then they nerfed every single healer and people just stopped running healers completely. Instead of nerfing everything or buffing everything, let's start looking more for answers. Every auto attacker should have a percent health option, right? Every auto attacker should have something to deal with tanks. Then it's your job for your tank to protect your auto attacker as they melt down the opposing tank. And then it comes down to two different players need to play better than the opposing two different players. And that would make it more rewarding and give more impact to both the assassin player and the tank player when it comes to dealing with this meta. And the same issue with healers. Instead of nerfing all the healers, because we were recently just in a healer meta that felt pretty bad, instead of nerfing all of them, like, I still feel like the majority of healers don't have a lot of impact anymore. I used to feel strong about carrying with like Stukov, Rhaegar, and Malfurion, but now, like, after they've reworked both Stukov and Malfurion, I feel like they're both really bad for that type of playstyle. And so that's what I'm really, really worried about, is we need to find ways to have more people in more roles impactful, so that it feels like you can do more things on your own. I just get really annoyed with the tank role and the healer role if I don't queue up with a friend, purely because I'm like, I need someone to cover the wave clear for me, or else I have to play ETC or Joanna. Both ETC and Joanna have wave clear, and they have a decent amount of wave clear. So, ETC, 6 auto attacks, and then you slide through, press W, the whole wave dies. Joanna, E, W, Q, 3 auto attacks, the wave's dead. They both have very efficient wave clear, and I think that's the reason that they're so dominant. I think if your team is covering wave clear, any tank works, but in the competitive scene, we don't see every tank because everyone's so practiced on those 2 tanks. So I think maybe the real problem, among everything else that I've already mentioned, is we only really need to solve one thing. I think that these tanks can be very, very strong, but one of the major issues about these tanks is that they don't have wave clear and everything, so you don't get practice on them. I'm very rusty on Murden, as you can see, so I just died for no reason, despite the fact that we were up level 16 talent tiers. So if I had more practice on Murden, I'd be doing much better, and I would be more confident in taking him competitive. I'm never going to take Murden in competitive because I just don't get to play him enough in Storm League and feel impactful enough in Storm League. Because you just don't have that wave clear. You sit in lanes. You saw the early game. I sat in bot lane for so long, just holding the lane because I didn't have the potential to wave clear and move on to something else. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. I'm about done with all my points. No longer worth ranting, but last time that I didn't finish the game, people got all mad about that. So I'm like, I'll fast forward so we can finish the game. I see that the next objective is spawning down here. There's nothing on the map for me to really go for. So I sit here because I was hoping that my team would come here as well, and we could like instantly kill like Gul'dan, because he's been face checking. Gul'dan and Ariel have been face checking a lot, so I was like, man, if we could do this. But then I saw that my team was going up to top, or to mid, and I was like, oh, they're gonna just wrap around. So the second I see them, I was just gonna retreat ping, tell my team to back off, and then I was gonna stand here. I was gonna tell my team that I'm standing here so that we can kill whoever walks in first. Unfortunately, my team had different ideas, so again, this is another situation where no matter what you do on tanks, you're so limited. And I can stun, I can do all this. If my team followed, we would have gotten a bunch of kills. Same thing, I made 2 boss calls that my team didn't follow. They went for other camps, they died for other camps that all just would have gotten free cleared even if we got them. And we would have been able to get a double boss instead the opposing team get a double boss. So it's like, there's so many things that... tanks are amazing shot callers in competitive, and because they see so many more things, they don't need to focus so heavily on all these little details, and that's one of the things that's so great about tanks, is that they have all of those potential, like, communication power. Like, I don't know how to explain it right now. It's getting late, and I'm derping on my words, but tank is such a cool role, and I love it when I'm in like plat and diamond and I can trust my team to follow up on stuff. When I'm playing smurfs in lower ranks, like, I feel why no one wants to play tanks. So I have to play Joanna so I can cover all the wave clear for my team. And I mean, I make these awesome plays with Murder. I mean, we literally wipe their entire team, and I'm the only one that dies. Like, that's great. Every time that you can do that is awesome. Then I join my team again, and we go for another fight. I can stay in fights for a long time on Murden and even just play a little aggressive. So you can see I'm focusing on playing just a little aggressive, and I'm just healing through all the damage that's being done. I'm stunning. I can hop away. I can pop Avatar and Second Wind if I want to go back in, so I do exactly that. I go back into this fight. I kill one person. I'm doing a huge amount of damage to another one. I back off just a little bit because I want to wait until I have my stun back up. I go for a stun there. I derp a rewind here because I go for that. I pick rewind a little late. I didn't realize I got knocked back, so I did mess up my rewind. I could have actually led to a lot more kills if I paid more attention. Jump in, get knocked back, rewind, jump in again, throw my stun. But either way, we are able to kill this person as well. So it's like, you can can still be super impactful as a tank, but my big annoyance is that if I am playing in these low ranks, I should be focusing on wave clear, because if I am focusing on wave clear, we'd be 2 to 3 levels ahead of the enemy team at all times. We're only really ahead because we're getting all these kills, but even though we're ahead, like, I still can't do the things that we need to do. We've taken very few camps this game, and we leave waves open constantly. So that's one big annoyance about this. But again, I think it's more of if we had more impact. Like, if there was a talent that you could take that would do wave clear on Muradin, specifically at, like, this level. There's 2 Thunderclap talents. Let's get rid of Sledgehammer. Sledgehammer does a lot of non-heroic, but let's make your W have a talent that's like, when you pop W, or combine it with Thunderburn. Thunderburn feels really bad if you hit it on minion waves, because it doesn't do anything. So you combine it with Thunderburn, where if you hit an enemy hero, it repeats, and if you hit a wave, it does like 300% increased damage to waves. So if you hit a hero in a wave, you completely wipe the wave, allowing you to be a tank that's really good at double soaking while the enemies are in the lanes you're trying to double soak. Like, that would be pretty cool, I think. Or I don't know, I mean, you can move up Bronzebeard's Rage, but I like how powerful it is. So if you move it up, they're gonna have to nerf it, and I don't want them to nerf it. So it's like, I think something like that would make it to where people could play more Muradin, but I think the real problem is on why he's not going to be seen a lot in competitive is purely because his Q is not a guaranteed CC. But you can combine him with a Light Bomb for an Anduin, and suddenly you Light Bomb Muradin, he hops in, lands the Light Bomb, then he can reposition and land his stun. In this particular case, though, I mean, he's still really powerful. I stun everyone, I rewind, I stun everyone again. I can jump back in. I'm staying at full health, and I didn't even really pick up any of these rubies. They just can't kill me. So that's the other issue, is like, if you buff him, I don't know. It's like, if you buff the tanks, it's like you're creating another problem. So I do feel bad for Blizzard in trying to determine what's the best answer to this problem. If you guys are not familiar with the build that I go here, I have adjusted it. I'll go Reverberation against like Twin Blade sometimes, but I kind of like Thunderburn these days because it slows them for a longer period of time than Reverberation, so it gives me more auto attacks that give him the axe if the fight is in a standstill. I still like Reverberation. It also keeps my avatar on a low cooldown, but I don't usually need that too much. For the rest of my build, though, it's I go Perfect Storm at 1. It stacks up okay. I'm doing an extra 205 damage, so my Q is going to be doing 456 damage. Then with Rewind, I can double that, so I'm nearly doing 1,000 damage to someone while they're CC'd. So that's really nice. And then, of course, we go into Give him the Axe and Bronzebeard's Rage, so we can do a lot of DPS. Followed by Stone Form, you combo that with Avatar, and you've got a ton of sustain. And then we have Rewind to kind of just finish up anyone that we need to. And this build right here, I mean, I get work done. I can usually win most fights. I usually out DPS a lot of the damage dealers on different teams. I out heal a lot. The biggest thing is, like, if you're doing this alone, this is a solo queue, your team might not cover everything that you need them to cover, so that's the one downside. Now, I'm not really flaming these players. These players actually played pretty well this game. I mean, we went 31-9, right? So they did play very well in team fights, but as far as the macro went, I mean, we were rather lacking this game. We won team fights significantly, but the things that got done were just not what should have gotten done. And that feels bad. And I think that's the one thing that's annoying on tanks is, like, the 2 most popular tanks have wave clear. What Leon Black's comment was is, like, give Stitches wave clear, right? And I think that's a great option. He doesn't need mobility. He doesn't need CC. You give him CC and he's going to be busted. You give him mobility and he's going to be even scarier. But you give him wave clear and it solves one of the major problems on Stitches. And that's the same idea as, like, Muradin. It's like, his problem, you can answer it in one of 2 ways. Give him wave clear so that you can get more practice with him, just get much better with him, and he can cover a lot of the other issues. And also, if he's clearing waves, then there's a higher chance that he's going to land his stuns. So that's one option. The other option is make his Q like Alarax, where it just goes in front of him and he slams it down. So he like lifts it up, slams it down, and hits everyone in front of him. I think that would be more reliable. It would just be on par with ETC. You wouldn't get the mobility that ETC has. I mean, you have Dwarf Toss, but and then ETC still has more appeal because you have one CC. ETC has a CC that's AoE on that same cooldown for the same duration, but it also moves him around to fight. He has Mosh Pit. He has so many other things going for him that this one small change to Muradin probably wouldn't make him overpowered. And in fact, I wouldn't even mind them nerfing him a little bit to make his tanking more consistent. Because as it stands, it's almost better to just run him as a solo laner, but then he doesn't have the wave clear, so he can't really double soak or anything. But either way, I know this is a bit of a rant. I've been thinking about doing videos that are a little bit more like this. Because the balance patches are coming a little bit slower. It's like you guys can only see the same build so many times. Same thing with the Is It Good? Like because the balance is staying about the same, people are all winning with the same stuff, and I'm like, do I do another Turk video with Is It Good? Do I do another Mal'Ganis video? It's like it's kind of tough to do that, so that's why I'm still going to do it. It's just it'll take a little bit longer to get out all the rest of the roster because a lot of people in competitive are playing the same heroes. But yeah, with all of that being said, what do you guys think about the tank meta right now? And this video is also being scheduled out, so there's a chance there's a new tank that's entered the game. I mean, fingers crossed. There's a chance there's another balance patch, but I do think it's kind of interesting. So I think that they should. I kind of want to see them buff more roles and then give more answers to roles. Buff double healer, and then give all mages an ability to remove healing, or not remove healing, but mitigate healing. Or and then give buff tanks, but then give every auto attacker a talent that can do percent health damage. Buff like all mobility, but then give bruisers an answer to that, or give tanks. Tanks need an answer to something, so give tanks an answer to high mobility. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Is like, instead of nerfing everything that's overpowered, give people answers to it so you can still feel strong, but then there's counterplay. I feel like counterplay feels more interactive than just nerfing something, because you nerf something, it just gets boring, you don't want to play it. But if there's counterplay, then it's just better, it's more fun, everyone gets to do stuff. So that's my personal thought on that. What do you guys think? Do you think buffing every role and then giving like a rock paper scissors among the roles, like again, an entire role is going to get it. So as long as you draft a standard comp, you're going to have the answers to any weird comp. But if you draft a weird comp, you're doing it at a risk against a standard comp. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think that's a good answer for it? Let me know in the comments down below. And for everyone that's been watching, I appreciate it. And for everyone else, I mean, then you're not watching it. But either way, thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.